Periodical Index. And on behalf of the CPI team, I want to welcome you to the second of 3 presentations on indexing. If you joined us last week, the presentation was on indexing reviews. Today, we're going to focus on indexing articles, and then next week, we'll have some hands-on practice with the issue of ICON that you've had the link for. I want to also let you know that those of you who complete all 3 live sessions are eligible for CEU credits. Next Friday at the end of the session, we will have a link to an evaluation form, and you'll need to complete an evaluation by Friday, March the 3rd in order to get the CEU credits. And again, that will be available next week. Also, we have a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card, and you'll get 1 entry into the drawing for each of the live sessions that you attend, and the drawing will take place after the session next week. I would like to, at this time, introduce the members of the CPI team that are with us. We have Sarah Wessel, who is our managing editor, and she is the wizard behind the curtain today, running the Zoom session. We also have with us Jamie Wilkes, who's our reviews editor. We have Laura Ladwig, who is our secretary proofreader. We have Jewel Kend, who is our indexer training coordinator. Doug Butler is not able to be with us this week. He's our articles editor. And then we have Lori Thornton, who is our retrospective indexing coordinator, and Lori is going to be our presenter today. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Lori.
Okay. I want to make sure everyone can see the screen, and I think you can. Can someone tell me? Yes, okay, very good. And we're going to talk about indexing articles for CPI today. And we're going to kind of pick up where we left off last week. So if you will go to that issue of Christian, of ICON, I wanted to say Christian, the previous title of it, or the council but if you'll go to ICON, it's volume 2, issue 1. Again, we click the download PDF, and when you get there, go to page 109. When we left off last week, we had just done this particular article as a review. We had looked up the author of this for the review thing, and we discovered his authority was Naselli, Andrew David for the author. But I'm going to show you kind of what else you need to do once you get these going, just kind of for a stream of indexing. You'll want to open either your text editor or the form if you're going to be using the form to index. I am using here a Windows-based text editor called Notepad++, and so that's what you see here. I then went out to the Christian Periodical Index Guide, and it's been updated today, so there's a little bit more stuff over here in the how to index part. But over on the left, I want to draw your attention first. Right above that red circle is the indexer's manual. If you need that, it's there, and it will be updated shortly. We've got a couple of changes to make to it. But you're also going to see the text templates for articles and reviews. Now I'm going to use the one for articles today, and that's what it looks like when I opened it and copied it into Notepad++. And then I added all the information that I could that's going to go on everything in this issue. So I put the journal name, I put the volume, the issue, I put the month, I put the year, and I put the URL to that PDF. And I'm going to copy and paste that as many times as I need to on that particular template. You can delete any extras you have when you get done indexing the issue. So if you want to put a couple of extras in, just in case there's something in there that you didn't think needed to be an article, but did. And you're going to submit the articles and the reviews in separate files when you index. And it's a good practice to name the file something like this. So like if this were done for retro, which this one is, most people will just use the name of the journal or a shortened form of it, and then the volume and issue number, and then articles or reviews there. And then, for example, if this were going maybe for the current indexing, which has quarterly deadlines, I often like to put my last name and then kind of the date that I'm submitting them. And I would have these text template things as files on my computer. So if there's any problem, I would have those later. Some general guidelines for articles. When you're using the author field, we are going to use the author's name just as it appears in the articles. You do not need to check Library of Congress authorities for the author for an article. Now you do need to for reviews, the author of the book itself, but for an article, you do not need to. I do find that if I've got someone with a compound last name, or perhaps their name starts with Van or D, I do like to look those up in authorities just because I want to make sure I'm putting, you know, the compound name just like the LC authorities is going to have it. For example, I have someone named Jennifer Woodruff Tate who is writes a lot for Christian history, and her husband is like Edwin or Edward Woodruff Tate. And I never can remember, is it Tate, comma, Jennifer Woodward, or is it Woodruff Tate, comma, Jennifer? And I can double check that by using authorities. For our titles, we're going to use sentence punctuation. That means I'm going to capitalize the first words and proper nouns and stuff as I go in. If there happens to be a book title in there, I'll capitalize the first word of the book title that kind of appears in the name of the article. But when you are dealing with a subtitle, right at the end of the title, you're going to put a space, you're going to put a colon and another space and begin the subtitle. The subtitle will begin with a lowercase letter, unless it's a proper noun. For a series, right at the end of the title or subtitle, you need punctuation, either a period or a question mark or an exclamation point if those are actually part of the article. But if there's not one, put a period in, do a space, and start your parentheses for putting the series in the parentheses. If an article is in a foreign language, you're going to put a period, a space, or if it has punctuation, you don't have to worry about the period, but you're going to do article in German in parentheses or article in Spanish or whatever it is. Do not use diacritics. Diacritics translate funny into our software that we use for editing. So do not use diacritics when you are doing this. So don't use that tilde, the acute or grave accents, the umlaut, whatever. Don't use those. And also, it's always a good idea not to copy and paste because sometimes HTML code gets caught in there. And when we are doing illustrations, we approve the following abbreviations for the illustration field. They're generally what you will see in library catalog records, but table is one that is not approved normally that we actually have approved. So you can use these abbreviations in the illustration field. Now back to this. As we are looking, we said that last week we had Naselli, Andrew David. What's going to be our title? How are we going to put that in? Do you want to type that into the chat so we can see how to do that. If we're using sentence punctuation, how are we going to type that in? Very good, Kelly. And I'm just going to point out something here. The word biblical, most of the time, Library of Congress does not capitalize biblical. They usually capitalize Bible, but not biblical. So that's just kind of something to remember. I'm not going to say anything to you if you do capitalize it. I'll just change it in the course, because I know a lot of us sometimes do that. Now, they do sometimes, they're inconsistent. So sometimes they do in a title, but that's very good. What kinds of illustrations codes do you see? And I'm going to actually go back, if I can, to the previous slide so you can see the list. Which illustration codes would you use for this article? You can type those. Bible would be capitalized, yes. Okay, ill is going to be in there. Do you see any others? Well, let's just go down the list. Is there a bibliography or bibliographical references? Yes. What about a chart? Do you see a chart? A map. I did not see a map. I did not see music. Portrait table. There are some tables in this one. So I used ILL, BIBL, and table for this. So this is what I had up to that point. And remember, I had all of this stuff pre-populated from the issue. Now we're going to actually start looking at some of those subject headings, and we're going to use the authority records over here to do that. So pull up authorities.loc.gov if you don't have that already. And I think Sarah's going to throw that into chat so everyone can click on it. And you may remember that we actually had, I believe, a book here that this is referring to. And this article is talking about Amy Bird's book. So we're going to look up Amy again in the name authority file. And when we look her up, we see that she has dates 1975 forward. So I'm going to put her authority in there. And then I'm going to actually go out to WorldCat and see how they do the title. With a name title thing, I'm going to put the name, a period, and then I'm going to actually put the title in, but I don't have to use the subtitle with it. In fact, if you put the subtitle in, I will just delete it. But I want to point out, when you're looking at WorldCat, pay attention to the subjects in the record, because they may give you some hints of some of the subjects you may want to use in this article that is doing a review. And when you have an open-ended date, we're going to do the hyphen, a space, period, and then space, and then the title. So you'll see that in just a moment. So when I'm looking at things like that, It's talking about gender role. When I look at gender role, I see references in the Library of Congress authorities. Now, I want to point out over here on the side that we have several different types of authorities in this file. There's Sears list of headings, and we're not using those. We're not using the children's headings. We're not using this other one here either. So we're going to use this, and we look at gender role, and it tells us to see sex role. So when I look at sex role, out beside it, I see authorized, refs, and notes. Now you also see that it's a fast heading and art and architecture thesaurus and all that, but we are paying attention to the Library of Congress subject headings. Over here, I see the authority record. I see the scope note. It gives me narrower terms. Sometimes it will give me broader terms. And it also gives me some see also references. So I may want to look and see if any of those fit better than what I came up with. I also want to look at that scope note. When I look at that scope note, it tells me how they are using this particular thing. And this one is actually telling me how they distinguish between sex role and gender identity. So that can be a very important thing for you to look at, just in case you are looking at things. And in this particular article, sex role fits better. Another heading I thought of was maybe feminism, biblical teaching. But when I look at that, I've got feminism, biblical teaching, and it says Library of Congress subject headings, but it doesn't have authorized by it. Biblical teaching is a subdivision. It's kind of a free-floating one. So I'm going to actually look at a record to see if I can find anything for the subdivision biblical teaching. So when I went out there and looked at biblical teaching, it tells me I can use it under religious or secular topics. For example, salvation biblical teaching or families biblical teaching. So can I use feminism biblical teaching as a valid subject? Yes. So we're going to use that. It's a secular topic. Another thing that stood out to me was maybe patriarchy. And so I saw that one in there. We might want to use theological anthropology, since Icon is a journal about biblical anthropology. And so this is what my index record kind of looked like. I pulled the man-woman relationships, religious aspects, Christianity from the actual books subject headings. I also put in women in church work. I think that was in there. And so you can see all of these. You can see here I have a space after that dash. I've got the period, I've got the space, and and started the recovering. I also added 2 lines to this text form and just typed in that subject, and that's fine to do. Now go to page 25. And we're going to take a look at this particular article. What does act like men mean in 1 Corinthians 16:13? Let's kind of walk through the form a little bit. Who is the author, and how would you put his name in? Search him in authorities and see how you would put his name in. We usually use up to about 10. I think it varies. We always try to have 2. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's just about one thing. But if you can have 2, that's great. And use what you need to cover it. Now, okay, you're going to use, I will just tell you it's Burke, Denny. That's his name. Now we're going to type in this, what does act like men mean in 1 Corinthians 16:13 question mark. And honestly, the title on this one is just pretty much exactly like it's written here in this particular title, because it used sentence punctuation in the title. So we're going to type that in. But we're going to also put in that series at the end. So we're going to put in the president's essay. So it's going to look something like this when we get that done. Now I want to talk a little bit. You can see here that we have a Bible reference, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Bible subject headings. Old Testament and New Testament, or OT and NT, are no longer used with individual books. So we're going to go straight from like Bible Genesis, Bible Romans, whatever. We're going to begin with the word Bible, then we place a period, and then we put the name of the book. If there is a first, second, or third, you put like Corinthians, comma, space first. Just like the example there with Kings on the screen. If you need to add chapters and verses, use Roman numerals for the chapters, followed by a comma, and then use Arabic numerals for the verses. So you can see my example there of Bible, Kings first, the 5 with the Roman numeral, and the 10 with the verse. Don't just leave your Bible subdivision subject heading there. Use a subdivision with it. Unless it's actually just the text of that particular verse, you know, pretty much you want to use a subdivision. So a lot of times when people don't do that, I look at it and add criticism, interpretation, etc., or meditations, or study and teaching. So those are some that sometimes work for those types of things where you're not quite sure which subdivision to use. So be sure to take a look at that. And then we also have here a sample heading, and you can see I've got the Bible, a period, a space, Kings, comma, space first. And I probably should have not, I forgot to change that to not have the superscript. Comma, space 5, comma, space 10. And then we have criticism, interpretation, etc. So what would you use as the Bible verse subject heading for this article, and use a subdivision with it? Type that in chat. Okay, and what subdivision are you going to use with that? I did criticism, interpretation, etc. So this is how it's going to look with that particular thing. A few more things about Bible subdivisions. Sometimes you're trying to figure out exactly what to use, and the individual books don't always have a full list, and especially the verses don't have a full list of the subject headings you can use. So go back and look under Bible, or under Bible Old Testament or Bible New Testament. For example, Bible Old Testament, quotations in the New Testament, or Bible New Testament relation to the Old Testament. So, things like that, but you're going to find that. You're going to also see that most of your criticism types, a lot of them anyway, start with criticism, and then some of the headings are inverted like that, but then there are some that are straight on, like feminist criticism and structuralist criticism. So if you don't see it one way, look the other. Like if you look for textual criticism, you'd have to go to Bible criticism, textual. Now, Greek words and phrases. On page 26 of the article, the author in this particular article discusses a Greek word that seems to really be the basis of his argument. How would you do this particular heading? Now, I'm going to refer you to page 6 of the Indexer's Manual for this. And if you will place your answer in chat, how you would actually create that subject heading for the Greek word. Okay, Kelly has answered, and she put that in. And you'll see that's what I put, andrizasthai, the Greek word. And then I also often like to add this as a heading for those types of things: Greek language, biblical terms and phrases. And with Hebrew language, there is not a biblical, it's just Hebrew language terms and phrases. You can double check Greek and Hebrew words using the Library of Congress linked data service. In my heading here it's id.loc.gov. But some words, and this is one of them that doesn't appear in there. And I think the stem for this is probably andrizo, but I did not see it in there, and I did not see the other, so I just left it. But you can actually see that in the thing, you will actually find a lot of those words. And you would put them in, if you find them in here like they are for Greek or Hebrew, except that you would not use the diacritics. So this is what our final thing for this particular article looks like. Unless you have some other suggestions for headings. Now, let's go to page 102, or if you're doing the 2 up, it's 53 of 101. Look at this particular thing. This is an interview, but it doesn't really look. When you look at the title, you cannot tell that it is an interview. This is where there is a change coming in the manual. on page 10 of the CPI Indexers Manual, we are going to be adding that you are going to list both the interviewee and the interviewer as the authors. And that's because ATLA uses it, and we also noticed Chicago Manual of Style uses it, and MLA uses it, and JSTOR uses the interviewee. We had not been using those. So if it is not obvious from the title, we're going to add at the end of the title, interview with, and whatever that person's name. And we'll include a period at the end of the title before we put that parentheses in. The subject heading with the authorized name of the interviewee and a subdivision of interviews will also be used with this. And we'll also use a subject heading with a class of the person. You know, whatever Jason Allen does for a living, and then interviews. So we're going to kind of look at this. We know that the interviewee is Jason K. Allen. And so who is the interviewer? Now, because he's an author, we're not going to, we don't have to do authority. So we're going to type it just as it is, but in inverted order. So I believe that is going to be Jonathan Swan. So it's going to be Swan, comma, Jonathan.
Lori, I just noticed that in the article, Jonathan does not have an A. It's Jonthan. So in this case, I might look in authorities to see, is this really his name, or is that a typo in the journal?
That's a good point. I think someone looked that up, because we did not catch that when we were going through this earlier. Did anyone look that up in authorities? And David, I will get back to your question. That's what I had noticed. I looked at the end of the article, Kelly. I saw the Jonathan there. So I think it is Jonathan.
I found two Jonathan Swans, one just the name Jonathan Swan, and then one with an open date 1962 dash.
Okay. I feel like that's correct. And David asked, what would you recommend doing if the foreign language words are written in the alphabet of the language in the article? Transliterate as best as you can. If you cannot figure it out, you might send that to someone and say, hey, what is this word? You know, if you don't do Hebrew, a lot of times you're going to be able to tell what it is. But if you need someone to transliterate, we have people in ACL that can do that.
The Library of Congress actually has some transliteration tables too that you can find online.
Okay. So you can also use that. So, so we're going to do that. The interviewer was Jonathan Swan, and the interviewee's authorized LC name heading. This is for Jason K. Allen. What is that? Type your answer in chat. Very good, Marla. That's it. And so what class of person heading might you use for Alan? Oh, that's how we are so far. We've got him in there with that subdivision interviews, but we need to make sure we add one for his class of person. So what might we use? Okay. How about theological seminary presidents? Does that look like a valid heading to someone? That is a valid heading, so I'm going to move on. So what class, that's where, and we are going to actually use the word interviews with that. And so what other subjects do we have here? Here, it's talking about confessions. And when I look, I get really excited because I see this and it says authorized and references, but wait, when I click on it, that's not looking so promising after all. It looks like it's trying to talk about James Patterson's book. And when I go to this 130, the 130 here in this particular thing indicates to me that that is a title or a series. That's not what I want. I want this to be a regular subject heading. So I go out and I think it's a faith confession. So when I look at that, I see a Library of Congress subject heading that has references by it. And when I click on that, it tells me to see creeds. So when I go to creeds, I can look at the scope note, I can look at the authority record. That is a 150 or a subject heading. And when I look at the creeds, I can also see if it would fit under an individual religion or denomination or names of individual creeds there. Because I can use that creeds in any of those situations. Now, it does mention the Baptist faith and message, but it really doesn't, the article doesn't really discuss it that much because they're really focusing on some of the other creeds that are in there. So I'm going to just go with creeds for a heading. And then I'm going to look at some of those other headings in a moment. But I also want to mention it talked about theological education, and that's not authorized either. It's a reference. And when I look at it, I see religious education and I see theology, study, and teaching. Because he's at a seminary, I decided to use theology, study, and teaching because to me and to Jamie, we talked about this, religious education is a little bit broader. It involves Sunday school and things like that. And maybe even religious education you used to get at the Y or something like that. So you've got those particular things. When I start looking up these individual creeds that it's talking about, the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy did not come up in a keyword search. So what I did for that one is I went out to WorldCat and I found the record about the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy, and the author of it is International Council on Biblical Inerrancy. So if I want to use this particular one, I'm going to have to make an author title entry out of it. When I do author title entries, I want to ignore initial articles. So this one's going to be International Council on Biblical Inerrancy, period, space, Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy. I'm going to ignore those ands, these, der, das, el in Spanish, whatever. We also had the Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. They had the two statements that they produced that were mentioned in there. When I looked at it, at the thing, I think that the article was really trying to show the value of the Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood in helping define the role or the kind of climate that the seminary had. So rather than putting the two individual statements in there, I left it at the corporate heading for Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. That's a call an individual indexer could make. So if you wanted to put the individual statements there, you can put a period and put those names there. I chose to do it this way. There is also a lot of talk in here about the concept of conditions for employment, specifically within that theological seminary where Alan is working. What subject heading might you use for this particular thing, for this concept? Put your suggestions in chat. And you all may come up with something better than what the team came up with. Does anyone have a suggestion yet? Okay. That's a good one. Okay. We've got lots of suggestions. And I have not looked all of these up, so. Okay. So this is what we came up with. We came up with theological seminaries personnel management. But certainly we can look at some of those others and see. And as long as they're an authorized heading and it fits, it works. That's something that individual people are going to come up with, and it's going to be maybe slightly different for different people, how they're going to come about that particular thing. A few more tips, and these are just some miscellaneous things. One of the subjects that I see a lot, and Jamie says he's seen it a lot too, and Laura, is that people use world Christianity as a subject heading. Well, unless you're referring to the series World Christianity, it's not correct. So what you're going to actually use, let me go back just real quick to point out, up here in the right, you actually see that besides the mark display, there is a label display. Yes, David, they are. And so the uniform title heading is what it shows under the label display. So sometimes that label display will help you if you are not a cataloger. So be sure to check that. So what do you use instead? You just use just the word Christianity. And another one I want to point out is you see here that Judaism relations Christianity is a valid heading, as is Buddhism relations Christianity or Hinduism relations Christianity. So a lot of people try to make it Christianity relations Judaism, Christianity relations Islam. That doesn't work because you actually see Christianity relations has references out there beside it. So when you click on it, it's Christianity and other religions. So you're going to do Christianity and other religions, Islam, but it's Judaism, it's Islam relations Christianity. So that can be a little confusing. One other thing, and I'm going to just use it just because this confuses some people, because when you're using the subdivision, like it's a chronology thing here, like Jesus Christ History of Doctrines, it is early church, circa 30 to 600. But like under church history, it's primitive and early church, circa 30 to 600. So be sure to look at those. Sometimes when you're looking in the authorities file and you're looking at it, a lot of times you'll see some unauthorized date headings appear right under something. Most of the time, those are not right. You need to go down to the subdivision history to get things that have dates in them. So that's just kind of a point I'm going to make about that. And let me see, does anyone have any questions? Now, I apologize that my camera is not on today. I was having some internet stability issues and had to turn the camera off so that I would stay connected and not freeze up on you.
Thank you, Lori. I want to give you a reminder about next week. We are going to do some hands-on indexing next week in breakout groups. And it's going to be really important that you read or skim the articles in this issue before next Friday so that you'll already have an idea of the subject matter of the article, so we can actually do some hands-on work at finding those subject headings, finding authority records for those. And by the end of next week's session, we should have every article indexed for this issue of Icon and ready to go into the database. Does anybody have any questions just in general today, not just over the subject matter, but any other question? We've got about 9 minutes before the hour. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in, so we'll go ahead and end things here. I want to thank you all for attending today. Yes, the recordings will be released. Last week's recording is linked on the LibGuide. And it takes they're not released immediately because there is some editing that takes place on them, and to get the chat coordinated with the recording. But we will put those on the LibGuide as soon as they're ready to go. So just watch
Okay.
that space.
I'm going to type in for Craig here. And I'm just going to make it criticism, interpretation, etc. for the, if it spans 2 chapters. That's how you would do that.
And I put the link for the LibGuide in the chat again. Anything else? Okay, thank you for your time this afternoon. Thank you for attending. I hope to see all of you next week.